My name's Tony Gibson MVO. I served 26 years for Queen and then subsequently His Majesty the King.
Let's go into detail, folks. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit there on the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, but what a pivotal role you did play, like.
Stubbornness, too proud to talk about taking benefits. Got to that stage.
Guys, welcome to the Combat Fuel podcast. This is quite a special one for anybody, not just the military guys. So we are joined today by Tony Gibson MVO. He will discuss what this is later if you don't know. He has helped to organise and played a pivotal role in the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, Queen Elizabeth's funeral, and the King's coronation. This guy is insane. I'm just going to put you straight over to him. Tony, thank you for your service. Thank you for everything you've done for our country. And please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. So as Alex said, my name's Tony Gibson MVO. I served 26 years for Queen and then subsequently His Majesty the King. And I am now a CrossFit coach and looking to start with Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue in the new year of 2026.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. Tony, if it's right to call you Tony, you've led your adult life of service to the country. But let's take you back to where it all began. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town called Blackburn in Lancashire. Most of the times when you're describing where that is, you have to tell people that it's from a Beatles song with all the potholes, or that it's close to Manchester, and then they have an understanding geographically where you are. And growing up there with a single mum, 3 other siblings, a twin sister, an older sister and a brother, she worked very hard, obviously, to put food and clothes on our back, and probably gave her the drive and the understanding about hard work and what I needed to do to achieve what I ultimately did in the army. Obviously, following in her footsteps, has taken on every type of job role that you could imagine to facilitate looking after a family that size. And then, I'd never left Blackburn until I'd joined the army. So that was the very first time I'd boarded a train. It was quite tough growing up, obviously. We didn't have a lot. We definitely didn't have holidays. And some people have had similar experiences, but she did what she could for us, and then that, as I say, gave me that drive to try and provide and do better for myself.
Phenomenal woman.
The army helped me achieve that.
Was your dad present at all?
No. He left when I was about 1.5, coming up for 2 years old. Never met him. He came back into our lives in later life. My twin sister went to see him when he was diagnosed with cancer, and obviously passed away very quickly after that. But other than her seeing him, I never entertained it. He just was a non-entity. So, no.
So your mum was a role model for you as well then, growing up. She did everything, provided the life lessons and ability for you to, maybe you wouldn't have joined the army without her and her lead and guidance. And you said you never had holidays or anything growing up, and you said childhood was tough. I mean, how tough was it?
I mean, depending on where everyone comes from, everyone's got different experiences. But, in the north on a council estate, it was pretty rough. Obviously, I wasn't endowed with the genes to be the fighter or any other piece. I was quite wily, so I was quick. But I had an awful tongue on me as well, so I could give a good verbal licking to anybody, including the older people on the estate, because I relied on that speed and ability to get away. And I used that a lot. It caught up with me a few times, and people obviously hold grudges, but you get away with a lot as well. And that's sort of the community from that estate that I grew up on. So I was quite well known.
So some high levels of resilience already at a young age, would you say then?
Yeah, sort of that stuff was ingrained into you and built into you. Those lessons, you never get anything, for free. You obviously have to work for it. So I pulled a paper round, I worked 2 paper rounds, a milk round, and that was then just to help contribute to obviously the household as well. So
you gave the money you earned to your mum to help your siblings get by.
That piece from the milk round went to my mum, and I kept my paper round money. And that was to obviously contribute early on. And that was, just for betterment, really.
How old were you at this time of your milk rounds and paper rounds?
Probably about 12, 13. And I stopped that about 15 years old when I was entertaining the army piece.
So at 12 years old, and it's, those lessons have carried you on to ultimately where we'll get to at the end of this, the kind of guy that I think you are today, putting and thinking of others first, be it your mum, the soldiers that subsequently came under you, guys and girls that needed help. But I think that may have been quite a pivotal role then, would you say?
Yeah.
Understanding that somebody else's need is greater than your own.
Yeah. So if it wasn't for her example, I wouldn't have, been developed as I had been, that way inclined. I just wouldn't have had that piece. My granddad, obviously my mother had a turbulent relationship with an individual, and at a quite young age I'd watched her get beaten, and then we moved in with my grandparents, who subsequently both passed, and I never had, as I said, that male role model in there. So mum had to work double hard, obviously, with my sister trying her best as well to toe the line, as well as my older sister forging her way into the nursing community as she was. She'd stepped back from taking care of us, and I'd done a pretty good job for my mum in helping us be raised while she was at work. So, quite thankful to my elder sister and my brother that way. But, those lessons, as I say, were imparted by my mum in the beginning.
So then at age 15, you've already lived, dare I say it, more than some adults at the time. You're now considering joining the army. And before we get onto your reasons why, was there ever a thought, well, if I join the army, I'm not going to be at home. I'm not going to be there for my mum and my younger siblings to support them. Was that a concern, contemplating joining?
Not that way inclined, no. Because at that stage, I think I'd made the decision that Blackburn wasn't a place for me. I've never regretted living away or not making Blackburn my home base. It's quite hard to explain to old friends from those days why, because obviously a lot of them always wondered why I never came back, or I only ever go to visit my mum, seeing my grandma and my granddad's grave. I don't entertain Blackburn as a place unless it's for a football result or something like that. It's just, I wanted to separate myself from those days, that hardship, that side of it. It just make something new.
Nice.
That's why that happened.
Why did you ultimately join the army? Was it some recruitment videos, pictures, anything you'd seen that was like, I want to do that? Or was it just a sense of, you are a true patriot of the country. Was it a sense of patriotism at that young age of, I want to join and serve?
There's they don't do it anymore, but they used to have soldiers in the schools. So every Wednesday we'd do like the assault courses and that sort of stuff in the gymnasium. That was how the engagement used to work. And obviously we had all the old school adverts. So 99.9% need not apply. And unfortunately for the Marines at that time, 99.9% didn't. But again, the old lights off advert, Land Rovers in the trees, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'd obviously gone in and I'd known where the recruiting office was. And they were always very personable, especially when they had the displays right outside in Blackburn Town Centre on the High Street, as it was in what is now a pedestrianised area. It'd always just been a fascination. All the old stories from my granddad about the war. He'd been part of, obviously, the Italy campaign with the Polish, working with the Polish, and was subsequently injured there, and spent his time post-war in rehab in Italy. So, yeah, just listening to those stories and that way inclined, I always had that inkling. But I just went in. I want to be in the army. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing when I went in to speak to the recruiting sergeant. That was probably the immaturity and the inexperience about that, and no one to really guide me in regards to like the decision-making process about entering. I just wanted to be in the infantry. That's all I said when I went in. And then we went through all the different people. So the para recruiting instructor, the infantry personnel that were in there, so the Scots Guards representative, and then as it was the Queen's Lancashire representative rep. So yeah, I then caveated and went towards the para and the guard because they separated themselves in the office, and I think that's just how history of infanteering has been through my time, and then ultimately led my decision to choosing the Scots Guards. But that came at going to court as a young man. And
should we touch on that then?
I just got myself in trouble. As you do, you get yourself in trouble at a young age, and obviously I had to go to court, but the Scots Guards representative came and said I'd been entertaining joining the army and that would be a better pathway for myself. So I avoided everything. You know, it's only community service and that I'd be looking at and fine, but I ain't got money to pay fines and all that sort of business. So because they assured me at that time loyalty like that, and the individual that came down from the office, I thought, well, this is a pathway. And ultimately as well, as I said, just get away from that trouble. So the council estate and the group led me that way. There was already somebody I was engaged with that was happy to show me another path. And, you know, all bravado out the way, once I got down into that pathway, as I said, reality struck and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm in training. And there was a time, as I said, I missed home, missed family, missed my mum. But it was my mum that gave me the reality check at that time. As my partner Laura knows all about those phone calls.
So obviously back then it was very different. There wasn't an iPhone in your locker to quickly ping mum a WhatsApp, how's it going? So, I mean, how often did you get to speak to your mum throughout training, and was it difficult? Very
rare. We had phone calls on Wednesday at the phone box, and obviously you had to have change, so you'd had to have been to, I don't even think they do pay parades anymore, but you got your pay parade, and at that time we got £7. Then you had to buy your equipment, you know, usual stuff, sanitary equipment, polish. But you always made sure you had that £1.50 for that phone call. I was quite fortunate. I didn't smoke. You know, I didn't have any other expenditures like some of the older people because I was young, 16, obviously at the time as a single soldier entry. And I just remember standing there, all weathers, didn't matter what it was doing. And just like we all know, training areas in the British Army have their own weather systems per bright. It was exactly the same. And I went to training in the September and it was already snowing. I stood there in the tracksuit, all weathers on that Wednesday just to put that £1.50 in just to phone home.
Was it always your mum, or did you ever?
It was always.
There
was never anybody else there because of the time of night.
Yeah,
and obviously, you know, in 9, 10 o'clock, whatever time that you got on the phone, you know, you were always worried about the sergeant coming out of the old billet as it was there, you know, screaming at you to get back in and obviously get by your bed parade ready for lights out. But never got to that, and I'd phone up, tell her what was going on, what I was doing, break down in the phone box as many people did. You know, I can't handle this. There's too much going on. There's people getting beaten up, and
the army was a very different time back when you joined, wasn't it, compared to nowadays.
Yeah. I think that's the character building stuff of it as well. People look on some of that treatment and the way that the army was very direct, and if you talk to somebody out of place, you had to be able to sort of back it up, you know. And there are all different life lessons to learn, but getting smacked in the mouth was a good one. But that happened all the time. I remember the first person that stepped up to the instructors at the time, and, you know, he was a big fella himself, but he got absolutely battered in front of everybody. And, you know, training's training, and we were all joining the infantry. We were all big lads. We were all wanting to be part of the infantry. And unfortunately at that time, that's what it was all about. But as they say now, chat shit, get banged, or you back it up. And
nowadays I think it's chat shit, you get your knuckles wrapped, you can't do anything. But that's a different story for a different day. But training was eventful or uneventful? Did anything stand out happen of where you were like?
Training was eventful. It was always eventful because, Purbright had recently, as it was then in 99, lost, crown immunity. I think it was at about 97 that it lost crown immunity, if I remember back. But you still used to do all the fun stuff that people remembered. So the sand runs, the two-dress, your locker parades, everything that is like an old school story was still happening. You were out in the mud runs, and then you'd be cleaning all your equipment in the bath, ironing it dry, and then hanging it again ready for the next morning. But you only had 3 or 4 hours to get that achieved. But that was the teamwork that they were trying to impart on you straight away in that first 14 weeks about how you needed to just understand that as a team you could achieve those tasks if everybody had a task to do. So people were washing, people were wringing, people were hanging, people were drying, people were ironing, and then people were putting stuff in lockers when they'd identified whose kit it was, etc., etc. And then that built, as it was, the esprit de corps for myself, the guards group, and then next door, obviously we had the artillery group, and next door to that was the first female troop. So my very first encounter with females in training was the very first female troop, which was our sister troop alongside us within the 3 billets. So yeah, it was that camaraderie, but at the same time, our corporate platoon was going to be better than all the other platoons, and our instructors made sure that that was the end goal, that we weren't the ones that were picked out.
And that camaraderie, that's, you say a brotherhood was well formed throughout training in the way that your training staff had conducted themselves.
Yeah, so in my time as an instructor and at different training depots and places like the Infantry Training Centre or the Royal Military Academy, the whole spectrum of training had changed. So that whole training, developing was how it worked. Then they didn't really care for the attrition rate. So I think there was something like 83 of us at the beginning. There was only 35 of us finished, but there wasn't any sort of understanding. The people that actually got through to the December were the people that wanted it. Yeah, again, I don't know if any of them were directed into any of the corps or any other job roles. I didn't have that awareness or that understanding of how it all worked. All I saw was somebody packing up their footlocker, somebody packing up their military bag, and then ultimately receiving their suitcase again and then being marched off somewhere else, and that was another name gone. That wasn't in my plan. Once, obviously, my mum had told me after one of the first phone calls where I broke down in the phone box, just I couldn't get my head around like that separation. Once I'd got over that shock of capture, and she was like, "There's nothing for you here, other than us. There's nothing for you. Stay there and grit it out." And ultimately, I did, and I did that off the experience of the older lads. They bring you on because you're a youngster. They know that they can get you to click the kettle and you'll make the brews. I learnt that lesson quite early on because, some of the lads were older. There was 26, 27-year-olds, and they'd look after you that way, giving you those life skills of that experience of the day. But at the same time, you could run very, very quickly to the naffy for everybody, get in there really quick and get back because you're the one that they won't notice is missing as much.
Yeah.
So sneaking out the window.
And was it a December pass off from Purbright?
It was, yeah.
Was that a huge point for you in your life? As in, like, I've done this. The first part of training is done. Like, I've made it.
Yeah.
I now know this is me for my life.
So that family of mine showed me their commitment to that journey because they set off at something like half 2, 3 a.m. in the morning to come down. You know, money then was hard to come by, but still the army had to charge people to come to watch the pass out parades. But they all came. They brought everybody that was, you know, part and parcel of my immediate family, rented a minibus, drove down, you know. Wow. You never got to see anybody pre-parade, so they were all obviously hosted as what you know as the NAFI, where all the parents gather, and then they're obviously escorted onto the drill parade square and put into the sheds. And then obviously the parade starts and you come on with your different platoon groupings. And as I said, you know, we all by that stage were the ones that made it. And yeah, we looked sharp. I remember the feeling of marching on, being very, very proud, ultimately catching a glimpse every time we marched around, whether it be in slow or quick time, you know, showing the drill that we'd learned. And yeah, it felt very proud at that stage to ultimately get there and have them come and watch that. And that was exactly the same reflected after the 26 weeks in Catterick, having only just done the 14 weeks basic in Pembrokeshire.
Was there a single moment in training that stands out to you as a memory, a lesson, anything from there?
Probably the difference, obviously, between what you think is training and what actually is training. The lessons I learned in the hours of darkness were the lessons that ultimately shaped the next 26 weeks as well, because the admin side of being a young soldier is important. I see a lot of it, and all the changes that happened in training depots. You know, we didn't have the time to be silly, to film each other and in the blocks and all these things that you see on social media and that now. We actually created a team because there was tasks to do. You know, people look back at it as horror stories, cleaning toilets with your toothbrushes and all that sort of stuff, but our time was taken off us, and what was ours was precious, and you utilise it to get what should be done. Those were the times that changed people. So when mums talk about soldiers coming home and doing laundry and ironing and looking a lot smarter, and people recognise that the change has happened, those might be the same cases now, but it was amplified back then because they could definitely tell that you'd returned home cut from a different cloth. Like, the skills that it gave you were just completely different to what I'd experienced at home.
Brilliant. And then before we get into what happened next and service, I just want to touch on your MVO. We'll get into why you're presenting and everything, but could you just let us know the difference? And I think it's an important part of your story is to, you're not just Tony Gibson, you're Anthony Gibson MVO. And what's the difference between, say, the MVO, OBE, MBE?
So the MBE or the OBE can be presented by public bodies. So anybody can obviously, I'll say, write a citation and have that placed in for you to then be awarded that from a public body or a person of significance. But the member of the Victorian Order can only be issued by His Majesty the King at the time, or Her Majesty the Queen at that time, for tasks specific and directly affecting the royal family. And that's the difference. The public body can't have that to be awarded.
Brilliant. So where we go with our story now on your military career, it's important to remember that it's going to be very, very rewarding to know why you were awarded that, isn't it? It's special. But for now, we've passed out of Catterick. Sorry, not Catterick. We passed out of Pembrokeshire in December. Where does your story take you now?
The first time I'd ever gone on leave was from Pembrokeshire after that passing out parade. Come home. A complete surreal experience, because obviously you left with what was your joining instructions for the next phase. So I knew I was going to Catterick. I knew it was going to be in the new year. And I knew I would be joining a new platoon, and I would leave people behind that had gone to different corps and different regiments. And obviously the guards would separate at that stage into the infantry training centre, which was at the time was in Vimy Barracks up there in North Catterick. So yeah, got Christmas out the way, was lovely, being around family and friends, and then arrived in another snow-covered county of North Yorkshire, and that's when training really did kick into another gear, and the infanteering took over. And the lessons of basic training from Pirbright, even though we had guards instructors, were not the lessons that we ultimately came out the other end with, because infanteering is and was then a different beast.
If we were to say infantry training was a 10 out of 10, what scale would you put Pirbright on?
If Catterick was a 10 out of 10 at the end of the 26 weeks, Pirbright on that scale would probably be a 4 or a 5. It didn't touch on half of the skills that an infantry person needed. It was the Billy basics, for want of better words, and the absolute bare minimum. Even though it was hard, it was the bare minimum of a requirement to have what people would understand as basic military skills.
And how was Catterick for you? Did you enjoy it to some extent, knowing that the end picture is going to result in you having another pass off and going to a battalion that you'd aspire to join after they'd supported you in joining the military and not having a criminal conviction?
So Catterick for me is where the bug of infanteering started. As a young man, switches started turning in my head. Whether they be good or bad, depending on how you look at the term pamphlet head, understanding how everything worked and what reason why, and then understanding, the mnemonics and actions and tactical teaching points, all that sort of stuff. That was where everything came together for me, and that's where the bug started. So the want and the desire for those early progressions into, the next stage, the next promotion, where that piece came from. And that desire was burning. And there hasn't been another desire burning bright like that in a long, long time. It was just, I couldn't get enough of it. Everything that we were doing, steeplechase, bayonet assault course, bayonet training 1, bayonet training 2, exercise from, the Pirbright days of camping by numbers to being tested. We're talking about people getting fragged by grenades in, training scenarios. You'd have all your kit and equipment, out for inspections, and then all of a sudden you were being bumped by the enemy. Learning how to keep everything organised to get out there quickly, it was absolutely fascinating. There was nothing that they didn't throw at us that I didn't find, and not even in hindsight, at the time I would find myself giggling and laughing and just having this sick sense of humour about, this is fucking awesome. I absolutely love this. And, the other side of it, there were times when there was low moments, but there was far more high, exhilarating moments than there was any sort of down stuff. And I think they thought I was a bit weird about that as well. But that ultimately, through, as it was then, verbal communications and stuff, how folk, especially from my regiment, found out a bit more about me early on. And there were folk who knew who I was before I even arrived at my regiment. It was weird. Your name's got here already. We're looking forward to seeing what you're all about. And that was pretty much my reception speech from my platoon sergeant. My section commanders had obviously been briefing units and people that they knew about, candidates that were coming forward. And that was a big pressure, but one that I took on and enjoyed.
Did you pass out of Catterick first time?
First time. It was very close call on 2. I was, so obviously you get awards at the end of training, and I was in the top 5 for 3 of the 5 awards. Again, you got your little presentation. At the time, the one that hurt me the most was the PT. I'd never been the fittest in Pirbright. As I said, I was the youngest, but at Catterick I was allowed to flourish. and not winning best PT was probably the one that hurt the most, because the plateau came in, I think, for some of the older people, whereas I was still developing, and that bit between my teeth, wanting to always push. As soon as they did everything with weight or put the weight on, like that development that was slow in the beginning was just felt normal. And that allowed me to take some big steps in that phys and get quite good. Most of my military career was spent on cross country, and the early stuff, as everybody knows, was about running, tabbing with weight, moving tactically at speed. But I absolutely love that stuff. And 2 milers, the combat fitness test 8 miler, it felt easy, it felt good, and I knew that I was quick. And ultimately that type of fitness was good, because that's what they were looking for that way. And those days in the army anyway. Now it's more tailored to strength and conditioning and things like that.
So we've passed out from Catterick first time, naturally. Same as Purbright. You've gone to your battalion. They know who you are. And let's just touch on it a little bit. Like, how did that make you feel? Was this a good thing that they knew who you were? Was it because of, this guy's like laughing going through training when it's meant to be hard, and he's like, this guy's like born and bred for the infantry. He loves everything we're teaching him. So
I rocked up to a battalion in a suit, shirt and tie, suitcase in hand. I mean, that's non-existent anymore. And then to be told, they're expecting me, go straight up. Someone collected me. The corporal took me upstairs. And then the platoon sergeant's going, yeah, I've heard all about you. We know everything about you. We know that you think you're good. And to be told that was quite worrying. But I was then quite quickly taken under one of the corporals. It's a bit of a free-for-all back those days. You used to be worried about bed check-ins and all that sort of stuff. But that didn't happen to me. I sidestepped that. I went from a 4-man room straight away to a 2-man room, and I was so junior. Like, I'd only been there a couple of months.
This would have been 2000?
99.
99
again,
still.
yeah. So this corporal had said, or as it is in the guys, a section commander, a lance sergeant, had said, you now do what I tell you to do. You work for me. If I put these boots here, you make sure they're clean. If I put this kit here, you make sure it's ironed. If anyone tells you to do anything else, you tell me, or you tell them I've told you that you're doing this. We got through that whole conversation about who I should be saying that to, rank equivalents or peers as it was, anybody else from any other rank, lance corporal, section commander. They knew that I was doing that for him. And I didn't get touched. I watched people arrive before me. That fear of obviously the bed checking was happening all around me. Bods were getting bungeed to the beds and tipped upside down and beaten with pillows and boots inside of pillowcases and all sorts. But it didn't happen.
Do you think that didn't happen to you though because of your character, how you conducted yourself throughout training, and you had this positive reputation carrying into your battalion?
Yeah, but I also wanted to sort of impress everybody as well. I wanted to make sure that if I did something, it was done 100% to how I'd been told to make sure it was done, and then put over that good impression that, I'll run to the NAFI when you've asked me to go to the NAFI, and I'll run back with whatever you've got me. And, there were old jokes of, here's £10, make sure you come back with £10. No, it's just, those things were done as quickly as I could, just to allow me to then get on with everybody else's tasks to the best of my ability.
And overall, how was battalion life? Anything notable that happened throughout the rest of 99 and into 2000?
Not during that stage. In that later 2000, obviously, we'd gone into the millennium piece, but that's when the talk of the Northern Ireland campaign being reduced was being put into effect because the peace talks were well underway by that stage. So the desire to go to Northern Ireland for what could be the final time was already there. It was something that all the instructors had already talked about, obviously being part of the Northern Ireland riots on the baseline. And we all knew that Drumcree was potentially the last time that anybody could get a Northern Ireland medal. And, we thought it was going to be like the better soldiers that would get selected, but it wasn't. And we went through to what was the selection for the first cadre. I'd only been there a year, and the first cadre selection was on. I didn't get selected for that one, but a very good friend of mine did. He's still serving now. And he ultimately went on to be promoted, which was fantastic. And I got that bug then, and I wanted that. And then that wasn't to be the case for either of us. So where we thought it was the best that we're going to go, they didn't. They sent some of the troublemakers and some of the, I'll say, not so well put together soldiers. We all have seen fat soldiers. So they sent them, and they come back during our time in this ceremonial role with Northern Ireland medals. And it's always been one of those bitter points. It's like, I really wanted to do that, and I know I would have enjoyed it and done my ultimate best, but people had plans to make and decisions to make, and ultimately you don't know what company commanders are thinking in that time when you're a junior soldier. But as you go through the ranks, you understand why. You understand that you can't give away all your best to better soldiers, as you can look at it in hindsight, and they kept personnel around just to give that platoon the different balance. And yeah, ultimately you can say they did what they did because they needed to keep a good working unit together. And even though it was very bitter because we all wanted that experience, we didn't chase that then for quite a long time because we knew like what was ahead in our future, because we'd already been told about taking over the Irish Guards, and we were going mechanised infantry in Germany, and those experiences were to come. And ultimately we'd find that out in 2003, and what was to come from obviously the Iraq War and all that sort of stuff that ultimately led to Telex. And yeah, it was different.
So your career is already off to a flying start, looking at a cadre and potential promotion after a year, which, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's unheard of, isn't it? I mean, even when I joined, and I was 2010 when I finally got through the door to go to Catterick, and it was when I got to battalion, 4 years of rank is what you're looking at. So to be looked at, even given the consideration to be on a cadre after a year, you must have been doing something right.
It was still in the old mentality of you have to have been a guardsman for a certain period of time, or you said no when they offered it to you. And that was pretty much the unwritten rule, that you had to have become a senior soldier. So, if people were talking about the 12-year, guardsman and all that sort of stuff, young Lance Corporals being promoted after, 2 years, as it was for myself, was pretty much unheard of. But there was a dynamic change. There was changes above my, pay scale and into ranks far in front of me in the infantry that understand that potential can be nurtured and developed and brought on, and that it really wasn't a bad thing to bring these on. Now, during that time, in that time frame that I served, breaks were placed in, and the establishment of a minimum amount of time in rank, depending on grades, was obviously established through Glasgow and obviously rolled out across the army. But I was on the other side of that window, so I was still quite fortunate as I progressed through the ranks. But yeah, I'd come back off holiday in America after that first cadre. I was unsuccessful. On the second one, I was successful, and I'd got through the pre-course. I'd gone on to America to enjoy a holiday, and then I came back fully knowing I was going to go on a cadre course. And as soon as that started, the Household Division and Parachute Regiment centralised course, 9/11 happened, and I'd just come back from New York, and I'd been back in the country 2 weeks, and I was sat in the NAFI, obviously watching, as everybody did, the planes crashing into the World Trade Center. And then it was like I'm on my first promotion course and this is happening. And then obviously the ramifications of that across all of the armed forces in the world and everybody's understanding of just how everything heightened from that point on.
So you're a serving soldier at the time, sat in a naffy, going on promotion courses. You know, the military is you through and through at this point in your life. How did you feel when you saw 9/11 happen?
Well, it was, the reality check of these things happen in the world. Something is going to happen off the back of this, and this is what we do. This is what infantry soldiers do, and that carried on. Then that carried on through the different ranks and the different experiences I had at training depots when other operational tours were going. The amount of people that I served alongside that forced their way out of things like the training depot with recruits to get back to regimental duty, to go on these operational tours was real. It was folk were getting themselves disciplined to be RTU'd, to stop training recruits, to return to regimental duty and the action. Like it was a real thing in the infantry. And I never went down that way. I was too straight-laced to get myself in any discipline. But the desire was there. We always had that desire. Everybody wanted to go on tour. And unfortunately, my career path and different training estates took me to those postings, and my regiment subsequent on different operational tours. And I missed a few of them, and but I would have got an accumulated service medal out of a couple of them, but ultimately I went to the destinations that I wanted to go to and I experienced. But the desire to still do that soldiering at the front line piece was always there. And
Telic 5 was your first tour?
That's right.
In Iraq? What rank were you?
I just qualified as a section commander, so I'd done Brecon in the summer that year, and then obviously we deployed out. So I was still a lance corporal, but I was also then promoted on tour to section commander or full corporal lance sergeant. And that was like the first time that we were actually out in a kinetic area. So we went to Al Amara. Obviously everybody flew into Basra and went through Shaiba Logistics Base, as it was, which was the British headquarters. And other than a quick stint at Basra Palace, we came back through Shaiba, and then we were told, in orders, everybody would be moving on a road move, and that we would be going north to Al Amara. Well, Al Amara had already become synonymous on Telic 4. Everybody knew Al Amara from, at the time, the Corporal Brian Wood, PVCP Danny Boy, obviously the contact there, and the first British soldiers to, as Brian did, fix bayonets and assault enemy insurgency. And obviously the stuff that had happened at the police station and everything else was a reality. We moved into Camp Abu Naji, having taken over all these fighting vehicles from the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, and it was a reality check. It was the first time you ever been mortared, you ever heard the contact alarm, the siren, whatever you were doing, whatever the multiple was doing, it was a first time experience. Shaiba Logistics Base never had coffins, like at 18, 19 years old, being told that, you're going to be living in a tent, but unfortunately you'll be surrounded by breeze blocks, with a breeze block roof to stop the mortar threat, blowing you up or injuring your bunkmate next to you. A set of breeze blocks to the left and the right of you. It's pretty much a good reality check of just trying to stop the shrapnel and stuff like that. So, I was in charge of a multiple, so I had my fire team, obviously in regards to moving us around, and that was a learning experience as well, because it was a drill from Northern Ireland that I'd never been exposed to. I'd never had the tactical teaching, so it was about understanding from my platoon sergeant in our quiet times how he wanted me to move around and what the multiple was to do. Those lessons went and carried me through into the later Afghans that we did, but was quickly removed from our TTPs because of just how kinetic Afghan was and the difference between Afghan and Iraq as it was during the voting time there in 2005, which is ultimately what we did when we went there. We quickly removed ourselves through the company group as sort of the kinetic stuff from the very early days of our arrival in Alamara to then force protection of the polling stations and then the localities that these civilians would come to try an establishment of fair government, which is, as a young ranker, fully understanding wasn't there, but the intent and knowledge as to how we were going to achieve it was, because we were briefed well. And then that's another learning experience, how to understand briefing and get that information articulated correctly so everybody knew roughly what was going on. At the lowest level, interpretation was obviously everything. So, yeah, it was a good experience. The first time it ever went kinetic. And, it provides those learning experiences, and massively different, as I say, when we move forward in time to Afghan, but a great learning experience as a junior commander.
And Telic 5 was the indirect fire, the mortars, was a big threat. Was it all kinetic as well? Did you have many small arms contacts?
Other than the first few in Alamara, before we were put in on a no armour inside the steel ring of Alamara itself, that's when I first experienced small arm contact. And come back then, the main threat, as you just alluded to, was that IDF threat. Like, that was the first time, obviously, experiencing a mortar bombardment, and really the first of the improvised explosives device, because they had IR triggers and stuff like that we were being very, very cautiously briefed on, but at the same time experiencing. So again, fortunate that only one of our call signs in that entire tour was hit by an IED, but that was that insurgency's improvised explosive device. We then move forward in time to just how well improvised explosive device can come about.
Did the guys survive?
Yes, they all survived. And again, the vehicle development. So we were rolling around in snatch Land Rovers or Land Rovers with half-filled and full sandbags under our bums and in the foot plate of the vehicles, and it's just being on top cover in a snatch Land Rover from Northern Ireland in the middle of a desert was absolutely mental when you think about how the vehicles and the PPE is developed from obviously the early Afghans into the later Afghans. At
least it wasn't snowing. It seems to be the start of your military career. Snow.
Oh no, we definitely got an education in weather when we went to Iraq. Yeah.
What was the hottest day you had out there, if you can remember at all?
I remember being sat in full riot gear for the Basra riots, and we'd just been shown all of the images of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers doing their public order, and obviously the turret was on fire, and you've got the individual obviously on fire in the turret as well, when you've got the baseline drawing the batons and swinging them at the public order, and that's what we were going into. And I remember sitting in the back of this fighting vehicle with my half multiple, sweat absolutely dripping off us. It must have been 45 degrees easily. We had the shields mounted to, the explosion reactive armour on the outside of the Warrior, and everybody just had their Camelback bottles of water just to save from dehydrating. The sweat was just another level, but fully kitted up. And then, we ultimately went out and established the baseline and quelled the riot, as it were.
Brilliant. This tour comes to an end. We could call it successful. Yeah. Everybody made it home.
Yeah.
Huge success then, either way. Obviously, Herrick didn't necessarily end that way for a lot of guys. Before we get to Herrick, and it was Herrick 11 you were deployed on, had we promoted again during this time before you deployed to Afghanistan?
I'd been into the training depot. So post that, Iraq had spent some time at the infantry training centre. So my first role as section commander, developing the recruits. And that experience of those 2 years was, again, pinnacle in my development and understanding of how to get the best out of people and understand, like, how I wanted to move forward as an instructor, and shape myself with positive and negative experiences of seeing both by peers and by people senior to me. And then come back to regimental duty, had some time again, and then went off on the platoon sergeant's battle course, and ultimately passed that with, at the time, a double distinction. So I still have my name in the corridor of Brecon as a double distinctive section commander on both of those courses. So again, at the time, that's something in the infantry that's held, in high esteem, and having that was a fantastic experience for myself. And then off the back of that, promoted to platoon sergeant, and then ultimately our orders, we were going to Afghan. So whereas we were one of the first guard units into Iraq, we were one of the last guard units into Afghan. So, we're talking 2010, whereas they'd already had an establishment for at least 3 or 4 years from that point in Afghan. And we'd missed out because of the patrol cycles and the cycles, as it were.
Cool. Well, we'll take a little break there, and we'll pick it up shortly. Okay. So before Herrick 11 deployed, you've been promoted to platoon sergeant. Had anything else happened in this period before deploying on another tour?
So nothing else post-Iraq happened other than the birth of my daughter in 2008. And then, as you could expect, an infantry regiment gearing towards an operational deployment, we started that operational training. Ultimately, that saw me commanding the platoon as a platoon sergeant. We didn't have platoon commanders. They were still in training at the Royal Military Academy. And before our pre-deployment package was set, they would arrive and obviously establish themselves into the platoon. And in common keeping with a deployment to a warm country, we were set to deploy to Otterburn, and there was snow on the ground in Otterburn. So, the 3 new platoon commanders arrived just before we did that. And the establishment of them in charge of the platoon, and myself and my opposite number, Lee, into the roles of the platoon sergeants, or 10 and 11 platoon respectively. So new platoon commanders set themselves out on the stall and what they wanted to achieve as young platoon commanders who'd been briefed on the Afghan scenario, gone through their training, and we'd had the experiences of our years behind us and then our tours. And as platoon sergeants, we're responsible for nurturing them onwards.
And how did you feel knowing that you're about to deploy to Afghanistan on a kinetic tour? This is proper warfighting stuff now, especially what we've seen on the early Herricks. You've got a young daughter now. Had your mindset changed at all during this period? Were you like, you were a bread and butter, I love the infantry. Being an infanteer is everything I am. I love this stuff. Did it change having your daughter?
So that awareness and the threat was the driving factor. To return home to her was the goal. That goal became more and more prevalent the further we moved into that operational tour because of how kinetic it was getting. But that was my why, as it is known now. That was my driving force. She was 2. And before that, so go back to my promotion course at Brecon, I'd received a handwritten letter from the Special Forces, and that letter was, come and take part in our selection process. We want you. We want you to take part. And I made that conscious decision not to, because of the knowledge I had of Special Forces at the time and how families wouldn't survive. So I tried to show that as a commitment to the family unit instead of the military, and avoided going on Special Forces selection that way. Again, there are a million stories about people who wanted to and people who nearly did, and that's mine. But I chose.
I mean, that is huge for putting your daughter first. Because I think that's, if you join the infantry, it would be fair to say the majority of people have an aspiration that I would at least like to attempt selection. I'd at least like to get on the hills. I'd at least like to try and prep for it. I think that is the pinnacle of infanteering.
If she
And you
hadn't
were-
been born, I
You
would
were
have done it.
invited there, and you were testament to your daughter and your loyalty and selfless commitment towards her. That thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah.
You come first.
And that was the first time I'd ever penned that sort of letter in return, because majority of the time it's just RCMOs communicating. But I was privileged in that way to be able to establish that letter.
Wow.
If she hadn't been born, it would be a different story. I would have wholeheartedly gone. However that looked in regards to the future, that relationship then, that was the dream. To be the tip of the spear would have been the pinnacle of any of those roles. And we know what those guys are all about. That's what we wanted to ultimately achieve. Different units in the army achieve different levels of that, but never get that unless they go there. And yeah, that would have been a nice feeling, but that family unit and that commitment was what I wanted to achieve, and ultimately was let down by that a few years later on, but not by my daughter. So,
Of course. And so this time we're during Herrick 11. It was a winter tour.
yes,
So it's contrary to popular belief. Yes, it's warm in the day, but it's not particularly warm of an evening.
no, it's very not hospitable at all in either sense of the community in the area and the weather. That winter tour into the spring and the summer, as it ultimately was bitter, and our experiences in Otterburn proved well, and it set us up just right for establishing and embedding as we did at the time when the company group separated. Our initial task was supposed to be support to Special Forces, and it wasn't until we arrived in Camp Bassin and completed the package, as it was, the arrival package, that role was then removed off us, and we were going to go into something that was called reconnaissance by fire. And at that time, Operation Panther's Claw just finished. That was the tour before. And then we were placed onto what was the tip of something known as the Cat Triangle. And we would be beyond the forward line of own troops. So at the Flet, and it would be a task for the company, but the company was to then separate into each of its platoon groupings, and we were patrols platoon. And that meant we were the ones manoeuvring around in front of the forward line of own troops. So they said it was going to be quiet, that the insurgency had potentially withdrawn for the winter. That proved accurate for probably the first 4 weeks, and then completely inaccurate for the remainder of the 5 to 6 months that we spent on tour.
And is there any standout firefights that were there for you? Had you lost friends on this tour?
There are a number of incidents that were documented and well documented, and we were quite fortunate to have a journalist with us. So an author called Max Bennett had deployed on our pre-deployment training and was granted permission to come along. So kind of like the Sebastian Younger piece with the American Marines. He was embedded, and he documented the whole of the tour in a book called 6 Months Without Sundays. Again, everybody's got different experiences of Afghan. I know that was the British Army's most kinetic tour. As you get further on in life and you understand how the army works, you can get access to these records, and history will always tell you like what the different kinetic tours were all about. That tour was the British Army's most kinetic, and I know that my call sign was the most patrolled call sign of that tour across the British Army's force troop. I was the only platoon sergeant to return to the UK without an injury. My opposite numbers, all of them receiving different injuries. Again, between the battalion's company sergeant majors and the regimental sergeant major, I had the honour of having the most Kazivacs accumulated, including everybody else, which depends how you look at it. We were in a very kinetic location, and yeah, some of the young lads returned changed people. We had 2 triple amputees in the platoon. And platoon sergeants do different tasks and different roles, and we do different things. And when the groupings, as I mentioned earlier, split up from the multiple patrolling, and we started doing different TTPs to affect what the insurgency was doing, myself and my good friend from the manoeuvre support group, Dale McCallum, who was one of the victims, we were snipers, and we'd formed a sniping pair, a very successful pairing, and he was ultimately killed as well, doing my job. I'd been extracted by the company to go and work with special forces as their liaison officer. As many people do, I've got lots of footage of that sort of stuff. And he went and did my job, and ultimately paid that price in the Sangha from controlling the firefight that happened. I was in the operations in Lancashire, as I said, working with the special forces, watching this unfold on green eyes, listening to the radio communications from my checkpoint, unable to affect any of that. And then, obviously, the contacts ended up with casualties in the checkpoint. And even as that numbers were being read out, I knew who they were, telling the base of operations who they were, sort of being that middleman. And then Dale's SAP number came across, but he'd been shot in the face. And he had a young son as well. And I returned a day later, obviously on a pre-planned flight. But, the platoon had their own difficulties at the time because there are different HLSs within the Afghan conflict. And we had a black HLS, which meant no airframe touchdown. And if it wasn't for the Americans, he wouldn't have been extracted. I watched all that get arranged and couldn't do anything. I'd had my very first experience as the battalion second in command. Tried to get everybody G'd back up again after it had been confirmed. And I'll never ever forget the words "we have to continue," and I just broke down in the operations room. When you lose your mate, but then realised that the next day I was going back to the compound where it happened, and then I would have to speak to everybody else that actually affected his withdrawal from the Sangha. Down 3 flights of stairs in the operational Sangha as it was, and then we're under contact themselves trying to get him onto the Black Hawk that ultimately came down, and took him onto the airframe to get him back to Bastion. And the experience is that everyone in the platoon commander, my senior section commander, all the guardsmen that were in the Sangha with him, tried to Kazivac him and what they'd gone through, and then just how we deal with that. And, from being received off the back of that helicopter and brought back into the checkpoint by a Viking, and then just understanding what they all did and thanking them for their efforts. That's really when the proverbial, as they say, the shit doth hit the fan started with the rest of the tour, because we'd had contacts before. What a thrill. We took pictures of it and videos, and everyone came out the other end, elated because no one was hurt. And that was from the first contact. We were the first platoon, and contact over the radio was the first time we'd said it. And for years, people sort of chased that. But then after those experiences, and through my army career, becoming a teacher at the Royal Military Academy or wherever I'd gone, all the young soldiers always had those stories about that. But for years I'd chased that, but would always say, don't ever chase it, because once it arrives, you never want it, because you have to deal with the aftermath of it. And then when you've lost folk, or you've seen folk properly mentally scarred, it's not nice, and you have to obviously learn how to deal with it. And I took the role of packing up all Dale's possessions, wouldn't let anybody else do it, and then brought back to the UK personal mementos for his son, like his operational hat, his app numbers, and then a bracelet that he was made, obviously out of paracord, just so I could give it to him at the remembrance ceremony in New York. And it's just, well, it's life. Couldn't articulate to his son what he meant. His mother knew. I've seen his family a million times since. Go to his grave. But it's life. And as I've said to my partner and anyone else that'll listen, then, that time, that was, as I've said, kill or be killed. It's not nice, but they were out to end every single person in that checkpoint. And then by that stage, everything was about infantry and what we were there to do. Not what the government wanted us to do, why we were in Afghan or anything else like that. It was, we will do our job as infantryers, and they will be killed before they kill any more of us. We had some more people injured towards the end of the tour, but we never lost anybody else from that point. And like one of my biggest takeaways is that, you know, the proudest things that the lad says, they wouldn't have gone back out on patrol if I wasn't there. And to me, that means a lot. You know, nothing against the platoon commander. He was a brilliant bloke. But they just wanted that reassurance because getting folk off that ground and the injuries that some of them sustained. Yeah, completely life-changing for them and for everyone involved, really. And then that tour came to an end. Never had anyone, obviously, at the return home ceremony, told everybody to stay away. Everyone was met early morning. It was like 2:00. We got back into Catterick. And I remember, you know, the company commander, all these different experiences, platoon commander's parents saying thank you for bringing him home, thanking me. And I knew there was nobody else there for me. But then the folk that I wanted there weren't. That was difficult. But I just remember walking away. Everyone was celebrating, party if you will, but not for me. Oh, that time, that was rough. But then to sort of understand that, that's where I sort of threw myself back into militarisms. I remember going straight into the RSMO's office and asking, like, I need to be busy. I need something to do. And the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst CARDA was coming up, and regular regimental duty was not cutting it in regards to just what I've been through in Afghan. And sort of my battle rhythm, my body clock, all that sort of stuff was set to, you know, to conflict, and was always awake and ready to go. But a regimental duty, just as different forms of stress set in and folk handled it differently. I wasn't drinking, I didn't smoke or anything else like that. I wasn't a substance abuser. I needed something to help me understand why I was awake and good to go. So we did that, and 6 of us were selected, and we ultimately went that way. And I think without the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and passing that course, yeah, I'm not sure how I would have dealt with things, because that really allowed me to invest into my understanding of training and development of people again, and just have a training environment that was sort of similar to deploying and being in theatre, because the opportunity to go to Afghan were drawing down, especially at a senior level for myself, whereas more of the youngsters were getting taken forward, and the next tour for the battalion wasn't for a few years. So I knew that I was going to be out of that cycle for a while, but it's what I would do with my time. And I ultimately caught up with Max Bennett's again when I was at Sandhurst. And then he's released a second part to the book of like, where are they now and what are they doing? But the lessons and the experiences live with you and they trouble you in different ways, like as everybody's got. And, you know, it's just one of those that you deal with and you learn. And, you know, some thought processes are positive, others are negative, and it's just how you handle them. And as I said, I learned to handle mine by submerging myself in work, which ultimately would then affect, you know, that status with my then wife in 2012. That would see that come to a head not too many years further on down the line from that. And then, yeah, your career continues moving and you do different jobs and you do different roles and have different experiences and you just keep moving forward.
So you've mentioned as well briefly that you turned down UKSF selection from a handwritten letter, which that's rare. That is super, super rare to be given that. So take my hat off to you for your daughter, for your family, but that didn't work out.
Not the family aspect of it, no. So that was 2008, and then post-Afghan, obviously, started having some troubles. Those were weighing heavily on my then wife. We got married in 2012. Altogether, we were in a relationship for 13 years. My daughter was 10 when she decided to leave. Again, just how I'd chosen to submerge myself back into military life post-Afghan, I found myself away a lot more. And that was probably my way of handling the stresses that I was under. But it was working for me. But, you know, alongside that, I was putting pressures obviously on her, and obviously it was sort of putting that wedge between us. I don't blame her for her actions. You know, the life of a military spouse is hard enough without the continued separation. So after doing Sandhurst, which I did as a colour sergeant and then a company sergeant major, pretty much back to back, I then went off to the Falkland Islands and then found myself in South Korea working with the Americans. And if the public remember to when Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump met on the demilitarised zone, and he was the first person to cross over the demilitarised zone and they had the handshake. I was actually there as part of a UK contingent for that. And that was pretty much the straw that brought the camel's back for her, because when I'd returned, that was 2018, she called it a day. And for me, that was very, very hard. I found that hard to take because of all the sacrifices, obviously, that we'd made. I had still the vision of, you know, this was going to be our future. I was getting close to that 22-year point, and you know, I'd been promoted to company sergeant major, warrant officer class 2. And yeah, everything was going in the right direction. I'd returned to regimental duty, albeit going out on these different events that were happening. Done some pretty cool things, as I said. I went to the Falkland Islands and South Korea, but that had then driven that wedge so much so that she finished that. And that came about on my promotion to regimental quartermaster sergeant, and that was very hard to take. I then didn't deploy on Operation Tosca, which is out in Cyprus. You know, people have got different views on that tour. It is an operational tour and people do get obviously awarded a medal for it, but I decided to stay in the UK just so I could see my daughter. And then that's where the next progression for my career happened pretty much at the same time, because I wasn't going to be involved regimentally anymore. The commanding officer had pulled a few strings and got me up to the All Arms Drill Wing, or the Drill Wing as it is known, and promotion to Warrant Officer Class 1, Regimental Sergeant Major followed from that. Whilst being that senior rank, trying to deal with a divorce and trying to get a proximity to his child. I worked as hard as I could, and then it all came crumbling down. As many a story as, all these meme pages, etc., look for a bitter sergeant major. I definitely wasn't that way inclined. We'd separated to an extent amicably, but it was later that I found out exactly what was going on, and then I was more interested in making sure my daughter had everything that she needed, and I was doing right by her that way. Like most, as I say, the stress was on, so I was losing quite a bit of weight, timber that I should have naturally moved, but that's when I found fitness again. So as I said, 2018, started all my training, running at the time, all these different terminologies, hybrid, tactical athlete, all this sort of stuff is now normal. The vocabulary back then it wasn't, and I was just doing every type of fitness you can think of. But then, moving more towards the CrossFit space and developing myself that way, and seeing some very good British Army warrior fitness personnel, especially in the early days, the Alex Rees, the Charlotte Spences, getting proper recognition, going to regional competitions in the Meridian region and doing really, really well. And then showing that support, watching on telly, YouTube, and on the socials, and basically getting to know like Instagram that way. So that's where that developed and how that moved on, and how I chose to submerge myself in something else to help me forget, again, something that was quite negative and that was going on at the time, other than, as I say, making sure I got access to my daughter and being there for her every time I could get away. But I found myself in Catterick in North Yorkshire, somewhere I was really familiar with, as the Sergeant Major of the drill wing, and in charge of the Army School of Ceremonial, being the assurance to the British Army's drill and training, as well as obviously going and visiting training establishments and making sure that the drill packages would be delivered. I was in charge of obviously the basic and the advanced drill courses, and for the first time also explained and exposed to the planning for military funerals and repatriations, of which I was heavily involved with in regards to my latter senior part of my career.
I think it's mega important to touch on. You only briefly, you mentioned it once about your now ex-wife, that you did right by your daughter. You were always there. You mentioned your daughter a lot. What you didn't do is have anything bad to say. There was no animosity in your voice whatsoever towards your ex-wife. It was she made a decision and you respected it. I think that's a very grown-up thing to do. It's easy to hate ex-partners when something comes crashing down. I've had a divorce myself, and I wasn't the man you were with that. I was, although it was my choice, it was very bitter. And I think that is testament to you, Tony, as who you are. You always put everybody else before yourself and your feelings. You have an ex-wife which you shared 13 years together, and I'm sure not all of it happy, but I'm sure not all of it negative, and there's some fond memories there which you absolutely should be proud of and cherish them. But your daughter, how is your relationship at this point with her? You're saying every chance you get, you're going to see her, and you have access to her still?
Yep. So Alexis is 17 now. When that happened, she was 10. She came to live with me when I left the army. So jump forward to August, or jump back really in time, to August 2023. And I'd left the army, and she chose to come and live with me. And
that was her choice?
That was her choice. And, you've just mentioned the word amicably, but I did warn her mother that would come with a little bit of karma. And I was made up when she made that decision. By that stage, I'd found a new partner, and obviously I'd, let Alexis know that, that was moving forward as well. And I'd given it a gap of 5 years before moving on to, to finding somebody new that I could be with. And, there was, an element of loneliness as well that way. There was another form of loneliness that creeped in, and they just needed to amalgamate, and I needed something to, like a jigsaw piece, to fill that gap, as it were. Now, as we move into her later education, her sixth form post-secondary education, she's chosen to go and live back with her mother. That was quite hard to deal with, but something that as a dad I have to support, and I can't put up those barriers. I can't be negative towards that. You know, those are lessons that she'll learn in life, and she'll understand if she made the right decision, and she'll find that out, obviously, as time moves forward. But it was hard initially, but we still see each other. She's a working young lady now. She's got a good job, and hopefully she keeps that up. And I know that'll limit how much time I get to see her, but she's working in a restaurant, so I can always book a table and go and see her and have her wait on me. That'll be nice. Yeah.
Where do you get your moral compass from, Tony? I want to bring you back to your mum. You know, in your younger years, and you were going out, this woman selflessly grafting for you and your siblings. You know, to allow your daughter to go back, she's expressed that I want to go back to mum, mate, be it location, whatever it may be. You know, I think some parents would be trying to plant seeds in there, rightly or wrongly, probably for selfish reasons, because I can imagine, not as a parent myself, but she's your world. You know, you turned down UKSF to put her first and be there. How do you swallow that inner, and I suppose it is an inner selfishness to want to be with your child, to allow her to do it? How do you keep your moral compass pointed north so firmly?
With that one, it's just because I don't want to create any negativity. I tried working quite hard with people that were in the immediate family group when obviously everything fell apart, to try and keep all the negativity around my daughter out of the conversation. I didn't want her ears listening to other people's opinions of what had gone on. It's for them to have an opinion, but not share that, obviously, with my daughter. My daughter, and many people experience it, but would have that division between her mum and dad, and trying to find that balance between them would be hard enough. So again, I did my level best to not speak ill, and people around me to not speak ill. You know, my family, I just didn't want that negativity towards her. Military wise, it's just, and I think I've said it a few times and put it up on socials, you know, I'd had some pretty bad experiences with leaders who could call themselves leaders. You have to treat people how you want to be treated, and there's many people that do it, you know, and use the analogy about, you know, treat the waiter how you want to be treated. You know, they're a working person as well. It just comes from that element of, like, the development side of it, and, you know, the changing in the army's template, and just like the leaders acronym and all that sort of stuff. How you want to be received is how you communicate and talk to everybody, from the lowest level to the highest level. That engagement, it means a lot. You know, anyone can be that screaming skull, but you're only ever going to be perceived as that. You have to have an understanding of, you know, that interaction with everybody on every level. We've all been at those different levels. We didn't have camera phones and all that sort of stuff when we were young soldiers, but we all have stories and we all have experiences, so we know what's going on. You just have a level of temperament into how to understand it a little bit more. And that's where sometimes in the office with the young soldiers as a sergeant major, those stories, and you could have a little wry smile on your face because you knew what was happening, you knew how to handle it. And again, like with welfare sides of it, if you'd have had those experiences I did, you can just understand and sympathise a little bit more. Yeah.
Yes. You know, and I have personal experience of that from you as well, Tony. You said when you were working the drill wing as a WO1, that's when we had our first interaction. You know, you very kindly invited myself and Combat Fuel up to a BORF event that you were running, and did also hear the Sergeant Major side of you back then, when I think people were being a little bit noisy when you were speaking. And I remember it clear as day, that bellowing word, silence, and then just very calmly listening, power of the Sergeant Major. And it was, but also at that time, you know, there was then guys of all different ranks, regardless if it was a BORF event or not, you know, you could see how much respect you commanded through respect, not fear. And I think it's very different when you're a warrant officer, any rank for that fact, it can be, you respect the rank, not the person. But I think after witnessing it firsthand and meeting you for the first time, I'm sure people respected the rank as well, but more so, I think people respected you as a person. You know, when Tony spoke, people listened, and it was always for the betterment of everybody else. And that first BORF event was brilliant. You know, it was our first, like, one of the first military things we did. And I'm very selfishly going to ask you, why us? What made you reach out to Combat Fuel to say, do you want to come? I mean, I suspect a bit of the reason wasn't for any personal gain. It was more to support the soldiers. But why Combat Fuel? Why not any of the big mainstream companies?
So the piece that had linked that in was obviously as I reached out to you and the support that you'd showed me in regards to looking for those products to help support myself in that initial fitness journey. The most important being, obviously, will I make a CDT pass? And from that point, I think it was late 2017 that I messaged you, and all the way through till that point up in Catterick, that's what I relied on. Those passes, those stamps, those certificates, and then being able to relay those back. You know, that mutual support was there. So the inclusion in Catterick and the British Army Warrior Fitness was to set the standard. The standard is always what people will remember, and I know that standard has been followed on. People have taken snippets of what they've seen as a junior when they were a junior then, and now as seniors and staffies, they're now delivering those events. And it's nice to see sort of mirrors, and I've laughed and joked about having Chesterfields in the warm-up area and all that sort of stuff. But then to me, that was important about setting the right tone and having, you know, the nutrition company, having veteran-owned businesses, and it was only veteran-owned that I brought in. It was important, especially in the notebook that I have, and I've still got you all stacked up on top of each other, and who I was going to bring in and why it was important that it looked like it did, because that delivered the standard of what is now and what everybody does in these competitions. As British Army Warrior Fitness has grown, everyone's trying to create the next level. And yeah, it's nice to know that I was one of the first to do it and say, this is what it should look like. This is what a briefing should look like. And, you know, in the military, as you say, the Sergeant Major can come out. Now I've got that experience outside. You can't talk to civilians on a briefing day for a competition like I closed down the room to say, listen in and watch the demonstrations. This is the standards that we expect in the competition format. You can't do that outside, but in the military space, as a Sergeant Major, you could.
To touch on that quickly, completely out of context, do you miss being a Sergeant Major? Do you miss that? I don't want to say power that comes with the role, but you understand what I mean when I say, do you miss that job?
I miss that job. I miss everything that job brought, but I miss like the engagement with everybody in that diverse space of, you know, the infantry training centre as it was then. There's just so many different people that you can interact with. It was like the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. There's just a wide breadth of person, from senior officer due to junior soldier, that you can interact with, and it depends how personable you are. So as that Sergeant Major, everyone's looking at, is he going to say hello? Is he going to talk to me? Jesus, he's actually just spoken to me and he's interested in my family. But that's how to engage, and I miss that element. I got more of that when I went to Edinburgh, and I got the inclusion of the civilian into a very unique posting up in Edinburgh. But yeah, I'll never ever in any job get that interaction that I got with the soldier from being a Sergeant Major.
And keeping us in Catterick at this time, you sort of started Borth, as it's known today. When you were in that job as well, for helping Borth, you just started, so you found CrossFit, you'd found fitness going through your divorce. What was it that was CrossFit, functional fitness, tactical, whatever we want to call it? What made you gravitate towards that over jiu-jitsu, cycling, any other sport? What was it? What was that key part and that pull factor for you?
So right then, it was really the rapid growth rate of CrossFit on the scene. The army had chosen not to, pay the rates to be called CrossFit, but the RAF and the Royal Navy had. So they had CrossFit. They had fixed location. They were naming their gymnasiums CrossFit boxes, and they were getting personnel qualified. We had qualified people in the army, the CrossFit level 1s, CrossFit level 2s, but it wasn't an uptake, and that's something that's grown since then, watching the army branch into it and allowing, fixed units to name CrossFit boxes in their establishments, which is great. But it was also that challenge, the fact that jiu-jitsu wasn't as big as it is now. And ice baths weren't a thing then either.
Not good for recovery.
But from that point on, I was a runner before. I've said it, if you could move, load, you were looked on as a junior soldier to be that next person that could do well if you could move weight and you could run fast and have 20 snouts and, a black coffee. You were that next guy for promotion. But it's the challenge of it. Like, it was always something new to learn. And it was so hard, like finishing a workout, whether you were on your feet, on your back, sprawled around, high-fiving people. I didn't get that experience until late, 2019, when I built up the courage to enter my CrossFit box, where I live in Preston. I was training alone, but then in the military environment, going to the gym, and there was individuals doing things, and I was training along with the British Army Warrior Fitness and alongside the open piece of the CrossFit Open. But I never found that community unless you chose to grow it. So it wasn't until we got to Catterick that I started doing sessions in the evening, running the community 3 days a week, and then using the people who are around me to also deliver like that cross-grain strength piece. So we had an army strongman competitor, we had an army powerlifting competitor that brought those different elements into the evening training sessions, and it just made a community of all different ranks, as I've said, that, it was first name terms, none of this rank piece in the gym. And then everyone was just having fun. It was everyone all in the warm up and taking part in the teaching phase. And if they wanted to stick around for the workout, and that's all we were doing, going online, ripping the workout offline, and just having some fun, learning about scaling workouts, and just building that community for the British Army Warrior Fitness CrossFit side of it. And then, just having a laugh.
So it's that community, the brotherhood that we have in the military, in sport, without rank. Did that then naturally make you a better person and better soldier, would you say?
Yeah, because it was rounding off. The fitness element was perfect, because obviously it was right for the job. It was allowing, obviously, all the physical attributes to improve, and was never, detrimental to the job role. And just that character, folk knowing that they could be a little bit apprehensive. We had different people coming in, and we had more females coming from different barracks to come to train in the evening, and we had a solid group of ladies in Sherry and Daisy who were reaching out to other barracks across the garrison, and more people were arriving to take part. But it's the fact that we had lance corporals from the driving space, we had corporals from the infantry space, sergeants, all the way up to myself as a WO1, officers all taking part, but on first name terms. It's something new, but again, in that gym space, develops relationships that across, especially the infantry, and as I say, that there was other cap badges, but it's relationships where folk can reach out and ask questions of other people, and it's just like a network, basically, a networking of communications and working relationships. So, yeah, I think it was a proper benefit.
Awesome. And it's nice to see that BORF is still so prevalent in the military, the army, should I say, today. I think something you helped to start and really drive forward has been, the uptake on it's been phenomenal. I personally attend the BORF finals every year, and it's great to see the calibre of guys that have gone through and done it, and just shout them out. Josh Greenfield, one of ours, who went and won it this year, which was brilliant. He's only been in the army 2 years, came close to winning it the first year, having been in the army at battalion. Well, he hadn't even got to battalion.
No, he was still in training.
He was just passed out of training and went to compete, and I think he came fifth, I believe. Won or came second in almost every workout at the start, and then came dead last on the last one because he was. But that's the nature of BORF.
Yeah,
it's not just CrossFit; it's military orientated functional fitness, which was brilliant. So we've been at Catterick, we've done the job. You've implemented BORF. Your life in the military is looking pretty good. You're then posted away as a WO1 as the Garrison Sergeant Major to Edinburgh Castle.
Yep.
It's a pretty cool job.
It was amazing. As I went to conduct that move, I just touched on, obviously, the Army's repatriations and funerals. At that stage, I'd been involved in the planning for the Duke of Edinburgh, and on the actual transition north, when I'd taken all my kit and equipment up to Edinburgh, and we received the phone call, and it was all stop. All my boxes got dropped off, and it was straight back down south to Catterick, mobilised the team, and then I don't even think I was in appointment as the Garrison Sergeant Major. I was probably still the Sergeant Major of the drill wing, but we were driving south, ready to enact the training piece for the British Army on delivering the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, which saw myself and the officer commanding the Army School of Ceremonial running the colour sergeants, and then ultimately all the different divisions that took place in the training elements for February.
Let's go into detail for it, because I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit there on the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, but what a pivotal role you did play. Like, please do go into a bit of detail on your involvement in it and what you did.
So the whole mobilised force had come down, and during that 2 years at the Army School of Ceremonial, I've been to London on a number of occasions to cross the T's and dot the I's, as it were, on all the specifics, all the paperwork, all the plans, and that had included recce in different spaces to bring the Navy, Army and the Air Force together in regards to executing the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. That included obviously assessing things like the naval gun carriage, going to a naval training establishment and watching them as the Army School of Ceremonial Sergeant Major was pretty impressive and well received. And it just gave me another string to the bow, as it were. But then it was a case of, where is it going to go, and where can we find a location that could be representative of Windsor in itself? And myself and the officer commanding the Army School of Ceremonial ultimately plucked out Purbright. Majority of the accommodation that was available to us, it was a case of making this look like Windsor, as it were. And the space that was available to us was pretty much all of the large car parks that Purbright has, and the accommodation and armoury facilities that they got to get that level of capacity into one location and then run training scenarios. And it happened, and that was the place that was decided upon. So, yeah, when the call-in notice was given, everybody assembled and we mobilised, and with one of the RLC groups attached to us, as the Army School of Ceremonial. They pretty much built what our vision for Windsor Castle would be, with 18 by 24 tents. And we used them as large gateways, created using one large car park, the Windsor quadrangle. So measuring it out and placing it on this car park. And then all the road network for Purbright was pretty much the marching route, so the Windsor Long Walk. And then all the way through between two barracks. We used as the route down for the streetliners. So obviously that they got their run out. And then we used the other barrack square as the chapel location in Windsor, and where the guard would turn out. And then, ran 3 different groups of training, and myself and the officer commanding were responsible for the quadrangle contingent, so training everybody there. I mean, there's plenty of social media on that, and lots of people saw what actually went on the day, but an absolutely massive learning curve in regards to delivering force training of that scale. And then, I'll say that it was my first taste of no recognition, shall I say, and the bitter pill that is to swallow when other people get recognised for, I would say, the hard work that others put in. But that's how that works. So, we got on. The team did an absolutely amazing job. Can't fault any effort that they put in. And we delivered something that then enabled us to move forward with other operational planning that was subsequently being enacted when I moved to Edinburgh.
Just to touch on that as well. So it sounds like what you had there, by explaining it, is that you've had months of preparation. You'd had the phone call that the Duke of Edinburgh passed. How long was it from that phone call to the funeral?
6 days.
So it sounds, as you're explaining, like this is months and months of preparation, but 6 days. 6 days to arrange the Queen's husband's funeral is incredible. And I mean, for many, that you could not have more of a high than arranging that, which obviously we'll come on to touch on a little bit more. And as important as that is, it doesn't quite touch on what is to come, does it? After this, you spoke about not having the recognition you deserved. If you want to, who did get the recognition and what was given to them?
So, again, there are certain ranks that, within the context of whether they were hosting social media, whether they were the face of explaining what was going on, it's taken into context of other people were recognised for their roles that they played, and not everybody that was actually involved was taken into recognition in my eyes. Like, to deliver the whole force training, there was only a mention in a book to the Army School of Ceremonial, and they definitely delivered all of that training. Without that training, without that time, without that, effort that went in, the force wouldn't have been prepared, because certain personnel who were recognised typically only showed up at the end. And, I'll be able to obviously, give that information. Yeah. It's a tough one, because you don't know obviously what could be redacted, what could get spoken about. It's a tough one when you see senior officers in London District awarded medals, and your opposite number from London District awarded recognition, but then your entire team that put the heart and soul into the whole training of the force element, not even given a thank you. And that was rough. even if they didn't even receive a thank you. That was a bitter pill to swallow. And I believe something, having voiced my discontent about that, was something that affected me later on in my career.
And let's talk about that. So you're still, you've now post-funeral gone up in the position of Garrison Sergeant Major at Edinburgh Castle.
Yeah.
During this period, a very, very cool job, which we can touch on a bit, but you, in the latter part of your career, and the natural progression for you would be to become an officer, would be to commission as a late entry officer.
Yep.
You weren't successful.
No. So every senior soldier has the aspiration to take part in the Army Officer Selection Board. And that is that opportunity to have continued service. And, you know, that means in the ranks of the late entry officer, but you still get to do what you love. And I'd had 2 of those opportunities. The bitter pill for me is that I wasn't selected on either one. And the first time I'd passed was when I was at the Army School of Ceremonial. I'd gone down, done absolutely everything that they'd asked, done all my training, beat up for it, whilst doing all these other tasks, and executed it. I received the pass. I was briefed I'd passed. But in the decision and in the promotion piece, the decision was taken to promote 3 senior warrant officers than me because I had the time left to serve. And at the time, I think I had 3 years left to go. So, you know, I toed the line, as it were. I didn't kick up a fuss. And, you know, these were senior soldiers that I knew and, you know, that I'd gone on this course with. So having passed, I took the next step in the warrant officer chain and moved to Garrison Sergeant Major. But knowing that I'd passed the Army Officer Selection Board was a big thing. And
so at this point, were you under any disillusion that you wouldn't be commissioning in as an officer? Did you have the impression that you were going to do this job as GSM, and at the end of that, you would then have your career rightfully extended and you would receive your commission?
I think there was a bit of that. I didn't, as we go on to the next course that I attended, I didn't put a nonchalant attitude onto that. I still did the same level of beat up. I still had to undergo the next Army Officer Selection Board, and still gave it absolutely everything. And yeah, I'd already passed it once, but I thought that meant that I would be the senior Household Division Warrant Officer taking part in that. And then having already passed it, you know, this is you passing an Army Officer Selection Board. Yeah, it was rough when it was announced that I wasn't taken forward, and I didn't, even though for the second time that I passed. And it ultimately then came down to it was someone else's decision, and somewhere in the Household Division they decided that my time was done, and even 2 passes at the Army Officer Selection Board didn't mean that my time in the Army would continue, which was rough to take.
And I remember you telling me, and I was pissed off for you. You know, you're a stand-up guy, had a stand-up career. You've done some incredible things throughout service. Do you hold resentment towards, and I want to call it, an individual had made that decision that you were no longer to continue service and you would not be receiving a commission?
I found it very hard to take. There were yet to be some dark days. Individually, I did hold resentment, but as you said before, you know, there's things that sort of stuff does to you, and you need to step away from mentally. So it took a little bit longer than usual, but I sort of let that go. What helped me let that go was sort of the messaging that I was receiving from people from across the Army, letters I was receiving, letters I've still got from, lieutenant colonels, one general, loads and loads of people reaching out on social media, whatever platform. I received so many messages for support. But ultimately, it isn't the soldier, it isn't the veteran that allows you to continue. It's the officer. And, the pen is mightier than the sword, and the pen will always win. The pen is wielded by the officer, and they made that decision. Someone made that decision. Do I believe it was the Major General of London District from a previous speaking out of turn as it was that made that happen? Probably. But, I can stand up tall. As I said to the Army Sergeant Major, I did the tests. I passed. I know I passed. And, new processes needed to be put in place to make sure that other soldiers in the future weren't affected. And those changes, I believe, some have been affected now, and there's still work to do on that. But, my time in the Army has come to an end. As I said, I don't remain bitter towards them. It gives you too many issues to think on.
The Army run off siege rules, right? You had that integrity to stand up, not just for yourself, but for the Army School of Ceremonial to say, where's our recognition? So I think you keep your head held high, Tony, because not only did all of this happen, our beloved Queen sadly passed. I know we all hold her very, very fondly. Who arranged her funeral in Scotland?
That was probably, the pinnacle of any soldier's service. I wasn't the only soldier to finish that year. But a way to end. Obviously, I found myself in Scotland, and on the learning account that was produced, the post-exercise report for the Duke of Edinburgh, it was basically given to me as a task to do the same in Scotland. So with all the learning account that took place, I just went through it with a fine-tooth comb. I was looking at the plan for Scotland, found myself at Edinburgh Airport during that tenure. Obviously, in the first year, and within the first 6 months, struck off what was the train element of the move. So she was originally due to move from Edinburgh train station at Waverley down the west coast of the United Kingdom via Carlisle, and it just was too much. So that was the first thing that I then got into effect. How could that be achieved? And, quite fortunate the RAF, come up with that contingency plan of moving her by air, and that was the plan that was affected. So the day before we were due to brief Scotland's plan for the first time to absolutely everybody involved, and when I mean everybody, I mean absolutely everybody. Police, ambulance, Scottish Fire and Rescue, anybody, Edinburgh Castle, Edinburgh Garrison, that historic environment of Scotland, anybody that had any part to play was in Redford Barracks that day. And I found myself on the tarmac at Edinburgh Airport with my phone, taking photos, and then speeding back in a car, Skoda. Not speeding, I was under a blue light escort. Trying to put this down on PowerPoint as quickly as I can using Google Maps, and then getting ready to brief. And Edinburgh Garrison Commander was briefing everybody as I arrived. The introduction was done to the room about who I was, what my job was, and then pretty much straight into this is what the plan is. And yeah.
And just for those that don't know, when you say you briefed everyone, this isn't a W1 briefing his guys. Like, you're not briefing soldiers, are you?
No. So the most senior person in the room was probably Dr. Joseph Morrow, QC. That's Queen's Counsel. So he's in charge of absolutely everything to do with, at the time, Her Majesty, now His Majesty the King in Scotland. You had Scottish Government, Edinburgh Council, all the different branches of Edinburgh Council, so East and West Lothian, Scottish Fire and Rescue, Ambulance Service, Police, all the senior officers of those units. Then every single commanding officer, Quartermaster, Sergeant Major of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the reserve units of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, Redford Barracks, absolutely everybody. This auditorium gymnasium that was converted was chock-a-block, and I'd never seen as many, senior people in one place. And it was just a case of letting them know how during the next 18 months that this would all come to pass, that I would go to different units, do different types of assurance, double check that things were happening, using 51 Brigade as the vehicle to do that. And then, ultimately put Scotland in the best place possible to, enact, should it be requested, the funeral for Her Majesty the Queen, which was a scary enough task as it was. And then I thought I would just be handing it over. No one ever thought that it would come to futurity, but it did.
Was that a little bit of recognition? You'd been very much swept under the carpet and there was no formal thanks for what you'd done. To be there in that room at that initial point, being trusted to deliver this plan, to have not just delivering the plan from the guy that you carried on from, who was also a friend of yours, but to change the plan up entirely and to know that you commanded the respect from people to listen. And it was, you said it was trained to Air Force. What you said went, and it was, that must have felt good to know that people were, we trust this guy, we trust his plan. I'm just going to pause there really quickly, Tony. So I hope I make you smile with this as well, Tony, but during all of this time, all of this incredible stuff that you've been doing, I think the biggest accolade that you have is that you're still a combat fuel athlete during this time, which is pretty big. I knew I'd get a smile. You sent me a bottle from the mess when you were there. So you've been to my house recently, and were you surprised to see that up there?
Yeah, those little mementos are, there's a lot of work put in by a good friend of mine up in Scotland in regards to doing the different drinks that he did. And usually you see that folk have drank them and discarded them, and like myself, whenever I've been given, a bottle or whatever, it sits as it does with my collection in my dining room. Obviously, I like to keep that collection unopened and for prosperity. So it is nice to see that, people have retained them, and, they are for drinking, that I believe they are for gifting, for special occasions, etc. But those ones, especially from Edinburgh Castle, were unique, that they were only certain quantities produced, and it was a nice touch to just see it sitting there on pride of place on a shelf in your office space. And
I've only kept, there's a few bottles that I have. The first one I have was post Herrick, the bottle of beer that looks like a muddy puddle of water now. A few from other individuals that we won't mention jobs and stuff they're in, but they're, and you're up there with it. And I hope little old me running a sports nutrition company and the impact you had on us. And I just want to quickly touch on that. And this isn't a plug on a discount code, but there's a reason behind it. You have a discount code for Combat Fuel. Care to share with us what your discount code is?
So my discount code is Inspire15.
And it's
very grateful for that.
But the word inspire, Tony, I don't know if you do, but you inspire so many people. Wherever I go throughout the military, everybody knows who you are. And I'm always met with the same attitude, which is what a good guy. and I mean absolutely everybody. I've never heard a bad word about you, which is rare. I couldn't say the same would be said for myself. You command respect wherever you go. And I think even more so what we're about to touch on is probably pivotal into those reasons why I think you're a good guy through and through. But back onto track of you're in Edinburgh. You thought that these plans for the Queen's funeral were just something you had to do. It was just part of the job. Fortunately, it wasn't just part of the job. You had to enact on those plans, didn't you?
Yeah. That was some time. Again, the pressure, obviously, that came with that was something that I felt after it. And the whole time I just wanted to make sure that, especially the young lads, obviously my bearer party, and, there's plenty of stories about all the trials and tribulations that they went through. The Royal Regiment of Scotland had to swap, the personnel around in regiments, as they should do, to allow for career progression. But that company, the Balaclava Company, the 5th Royal Regiment of Scotland, really did sacrifice quite a lot, because I put them under enough pressure because of the standard that they needed to be at, and the whole force pretty much just understood the task, but they were always going to be the focal point. So even when I got everybody together, including Leverton's, the funeral directors and the police, to do the motorcade that everybody saw from Balmoral to Edinburgh, up until the early morning rehearsals in Holyrood with the bearer party, which was really hard to obviously, understand how a royal palace works in regards to trying to bring in transit vans and block off the front entrance and not let people think that something is taking part, like a training scenario that involves a coffin. And, lo and behold, if it was seen or photographed by anybody, especially from up high at Arthur's Seat, in any hour of the day, we always did early morning rehearsals. But yeah, I knew that the world would be watching on, especially on those young lads' shoulders, obviously carrying Her Majesty. And they really did pull it out for myself. We'd done enough training across, being in Redford, obviously training the groups for the different Guard of Honours and, the different proclamation parades and, Guard of Honours, etc., that they had to conduct during the days of, receiving Her Majesty from Balmoral, King's reception, the proclamation parades, etc. It all just went like clockwork, because we'd already done all the rehearsals. All the regiments had given up their time to rehearse these things. And, apart from a few changes and obviously time-based elements which affected, any sort of parade with soldiers collapsing, etc., there was still the, underlying, this is Her Majesty. They looked the part. There was very few elements that went wrong. And ultimately that reflected in our post-exercise report when we had to generate, obviously, what went right, what went wrong. And I know we delivered a better package than what London did, because I was at the overall sweep up, and by that stage we'd already rewritten His Majesty the King's funeral plan for Scotland, and we delivered that at the post-exercise report fairs as well for Her Majesty's funeral, which just held us in high regard with Whitehall and London District. And yeah, just the feedback was absolutely phenomenal.
So we, the public, found out, I think it was around 6 p.m. Of Her Majesty's passing. You found out, I believe, around midday.
So it would have been a bit later, so about 3 o'clock that afternoon I found out.
And what time frame did you have until to move her from Balmoral to Edinburgh Castle?
So once that had been announced, we had 48 hours to get the troops to Redford Barracks. and that calling notice went out immediately. We had, for instance, the band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland complete in Cyprus at the time. So obviously getting hold of them, you can imagine everybody was trying different things. I was phoning the drum major, international dialing codes, and we got everybody, all different flights. They worked so hard to get back, the 51 Brigade clerks and, all the captains, everybody, tooth and nail, all the civil servants, drivers, everything was put on to gather the force. Training scenarios, 2 Scots were out on training, 3 Scots were on exercise. Everybody just stopped what they're doing, as they should do, for that calling notice, and then they all came together within that time frame, and then it was straight on. So by that stage, my feet hadn't touched the floor. I was literally here, there, and everywhere all at the same time, being driven mostly by blue light. The city went into lockdown. There was only 2 or 3 examples of UK armed forces not getting through the blue light cordons, which is super rare, just because of the codes and then the police liaison officers that we had in regards to establishing vehicle call signs and allowing that information to be disseminated through the 51 Brigade TOC, as it were, that close operating proximity with the liaison officers. So, yeah, it seemed to flow very, very well, especially with the Royal Regiment of Scotland Reserve units running that and coordinating everything in the background. Their CO doing an amazing job with his team on behalf of the 51 Brigade commander. So Brigadier Ben was overall in charge of all those movements, and then all the training scenarios, as I said, had been assured by myself and people that I brought up from the Army School of Ceremonial, my previous job, and we knew that the regiments were ready with their Guard of Honours, etc., to then sort of affect the parades and deliver. And then it was just getting straight into the timeline of the first was the proclamation of His Majesty the King, followed shortly on from the proclamation that happened at St James's Palace in London. We effected ours at the Meerkat Cross with Dr. Joseph Morrow, Queen's Counsel, who his full title is the Lord Lion, King of Orange for Scotland. He did the proclamation announcement at the Meerkat Cross in Edinburgh, which was just outside St Giles Cathedral, which is where everybody saw Her Majesty come into, ultimately laying in rest there before she departed for Edinburgh Airport. And yeah, like I say, it all went really, really well. The training scenarios had set us up for success, and just that understanding, that communication to the lowest level, I believe on that personable thing as well. They understood sort of my intent, and it wasn't just them working for the Royal Regiment of Scotland, but I felt that they were working for me as well, which showed in their delivery. I'm super grateful to everybody that took part in any form of those parades, from the Royal Regiment of Scotland, anybody that was involved from the castle, anybody that was there from the police contingents, etc. It just, as people have told me, it was an amazing experience, very, very humbling, upsetting at times, especially speaking and listening to veterans on the sides from the crowds. Time I was off social media for a long, long time, just because of the amount of messages that were there, and I didn't answer people for days. There's all sorts of different stories. I remember falling asleep in my dinner one evening because I'd just been on my feet non-stop. I was still in all my ceremonial uniform. I'd just come from Holyrood, briefing, the King and the Princess Royal and the other members on how they were going to stand in rest. And once that had finished and I left, and spoke to the crowds. Obviously, the royal contingent sped off as they do, back down to Holyrood Palace, and I had the walk from St Giles up to the castle. But I didn't stop. I can't even remember the time. I was chatting to absolutely everybody. People wanted to know what was going on, and it was humbling to see the crowd, pats on the back, and just like the profound sense of loss from people who, come to see, the parade, and then got a chance to speak to Tony from the council estate, who ended up as a warrant officer in charge of the funeral. And I didn't want to not talk to folk. It was just the sort of natural thing to do. But that comes from that. I think being personable with people, and it's very easy just to blacken folk out and just head straight off. But I think that's what's wrong. In the military, it's about being open and not giving away absolutely everything, but you have the chance to stop and talk and
giving people some of your time.
Yeah, they'd shown up to see Her Majesty and the troops. It was easy to do. So yeah.
To circle back round to you not receiving your commission first time round, you wouldn't have been in this position though if you had received it.
No, the first time round I would have promoted, having only just arrived at Edinburgh, and then in the next April I would have moved on. So I wouldn't have even done, I don't think, 8 months in position, and effectively I would have been promoted to late entry captain and moved off somewhere potentially within the household division. So I wouldn't have been able to obviously execute that plan. Yeah.
In a way, grateful to that person that stopped you, because that's given you the Queen aside. What a memory. What an achievement to do, to be the guy that helped execute that part of the Queen's funeral in Scotland. Like, that you played like arguably the most pivotal role in bringing everybody together, tri-service and emergency services. And so importantly so, whether you agree with it or not, it was, because you're not Tony Gibson, you're MVO. We touched on how you're awarded this, and it was directly from the King, wasn't it? And that wasn't just can't stress it enough. Whatever we might say about certain titles can be maybe given to people because of positions they hold. This isn't one of those things. This isn't somebody or somebody that's done something or been given recognition for something else, is it? So,
like, obviously I knew that the time in the army was coming to an end, and my exit was already written, having been unsuccessful on that second time. But having delivered, Her Majesty's funeral, to be then awarded the Member of the Victorian Order and to have it announced was absolutely amazing. Like, it was just, okay, this is recognition. I'm grateful for that. And yeah, I got the opportunity to go up, take my family, and Alexis came and met His Majesty the King. But more importantly, like, obviously the young lads were there, to receive their RVMs for conveying Her Majesty. The pressure on their shoulders, removing that coffin, and taking it inside Holyrood, and then obviously conveying it back into the hearse, and with myself escorting Her Majesty up the hill for the final time through Edinburgh. They got to take their mothers into the room, and just to see each of them receive their award and just how proud the families were of them. I think that's what, set me off in front of His Majesty, because obviously all those emotions, proud mothers, it was weird, because then he obviously asked why I was upset, and as well as obviously being awarded that medal for, ultimately planning and conducting his mother's funeral. It's a man giving someone else a medal for doing that. It's a strange feeling. But, I conveyed to him that it was my last day in the army as well. Strange time. And, the emotion got the better of me. But he soon snapped me out of it because, he put his hand up and he's like, high five to my daughter. And she just said I was embarrassing for crying and high five the king. And it's just like, without a hidden camera on the wall, so many of those experiences happened during that funeral that, I would probably have to seek permission. As folk have talked to me about putting it all down in a book and the different experiences between the two funerals and just that sort of stuff. Like, it would be world-leading telly had there been a camera in those rooms to see some of the stuff that I saw, brothers and sisters interacting. They're just a family that lost their mum, and he's giving out medals. Weird, but humbling and proud.
And very well deserved.
It's because he saw my Combat Fuel t-shirt.
You had it on underneath, right? And again, every time we get to something, we're like, it can't become any more inspiring, or there can't possibly be anything else. Like, that's your military career finished. But it's not. You then carry on for the King's coronation, don't you?
Yeah.
So
most people will be in the resettlement year. And obviously you have plans of how you're going to resettle and how you're going to continue. But as I said, we'd already written and delivered His Majesty's funeral plan. And then, obviously, we have to talk about, the coronation. So all the plan comes into effect. Well, the King's coronation took place in London, and everybody saw and everybody watched. My namesake for London District, who'd been involved in all of the events that we've already talked about, he was going to deliver that side of it, but Scotland had a part to play in that as well. So the planning started with, again, 51 Brigade and Dr. Joseph Morrow and myself in regards to how Historical Environment Scotland would play a key role in this with the Stone of Destiny and how it would be moved for the first time from its keeping in Edinburgh Castle, and how it would go to St Giles Cathedral and sit underneath the Scottish throne, and then the articles that they would then in place on His Majesty and take that part on. All of that came with the planning considerations. So whilst most people are on their resettlement courses and worrying about what their future is, I don't know why I was sat on the computers and still in my time there in Scotland tapping away about how we were going to create these plans. And just, I think it was an unwillingness to withdraw myself until it was actually complete, to then not hand over something that didn't have that stamp on it. And I wanted to make sure that was a sort of reflection on myself, not down in tools. And we got it done. Very, very grateful to, the officer that was working with me. It was something I'll never forget. And the civil servant, Hilary, she was an absolute star. Just met so many great people who understood what I was doing, who showed concern about that resettlement process, but I sort of tied it all in, and I was happy to an extent, although I only gave myself 3 months eventually in the end, because I handed it over, and then I really could just sit back because, I knew what was going on, I knew how it would look, and then my time was done.
How did that make you feel? You just handed this over knowing that in 3 months, it's the last paycheck, it's the last involvement you're going to have wearing kit.
Yeah, I was absolutely destroyed. It took a long, long time. Long time. just to come to terms with it. I felt lost for a long time. I was probably depressed for a little bit of that. Till I got a grip on myself, started to like think, plan and execute different plans that I'd obviously thought about post-service. And that think, plan, execute, it's stuck with me. Just never say quit and just keep different things ticking over. Just every setback. It wasn't a simple transition. Those personnel in the army that have a smooth transition, I take my hat off to you, because I got out and I was one of those that thought, it'll be good, it'll be smooth, I'll be all right. It wasn't. There were some rough waters, and I wasn't prepared, and there were some times that it was proper rough. And you know, you've heard my partner talking about, you know, like entitlements and benefits and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, after 26 years in the army, yeah, stubbornness, too proud to talk about like taking benefits, but got to that stage. But yeah, got a grip, got myself back into work, and that's what I just needed. I just needed that. Oh, I had no one around me to say, get a grip of yourself. All of them were gone. And once I'd finally got a grip of myself, started to in effect different plans, and yeah, shaved the old castaway beard and cut my hair, and then remembered, you know, got a bit about myself and started to look at different roles and opportunities and speaking to people, and yeah.
And can we touch on some of those bits on the low lows, Tony? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So as you were preparing to join the prison service, and your partner had persuaded you to say, you know, you've given your life to the country, ask for a little bit of help. So you had a little bit of help in terms of some unemployment benefit. You know, if anyone's more deserving, I couldn't think of a more deserving person. I really couldn't. Without keeping politically minded, you were given a bit of support, and then it was taken away from you and told you that you'd gone into the prison service and you were told to pay it back.
Yeah. Obviously, everyone has their end of service review, and I knew at some stage I'd be receiving my pension. I'd already reached out to, you know, find different forms of employment, and even went as far as obviously job seeker, and you know, got involved with my partner's advice, you know, selecting different types of benefit, the benefit for my daughter, and then obviously job seekers allowance and attending the appointments, etc., that they have for you while you're waiting for the different plans that I had, sort of Lancashire Fire and Rescue and the prison service as it developed. I just did what they asked me to do. I felt awful speaking to these people on the phone, the way they talk to you. And yeah, they phoned me up one day, told me that as I'd been claiming that they'd paid me too much, and that even though they'd given it to me in installments, obviously that I had to pay it back as a one-er, and that happened to the tune of £1,000 and then £500 and a separate incident, and obviously I had to pay it back in a one-er, and that hit me quite hard. But the reason that they'd taken that action was because I'd then received or was in receivership of my army pension. So what was, you know, my lump sum, which was going towards the house that I'd invested in, because that had been given to me, they then cancelled obviously all the funds that I was receiving because I'd been paid quite a substantial amount of money. I don't understand the ins and outs behind it, how, it's a thought. They're not interested. And these are the things that you're not briefed when you leave. Like you've got a lump sum, it's tax-free. However, you're claiming these benefits, that's not allowed. We're taking them off you. And that's basically how it went down.
That's not here's some money for nothing. That was money for 26 years of service.
Yeah. You see it all too often in the news, and like veterans and folk getting forgotten, and it's just another hurdle. So I've never been good at jumping hurdles, so I smashed through that one. You're just left with a bitter taste, and I won't ever, say to people, as I was being stubborn about claiming those sorts of stuff, because you're entitled throughout your career, however long it is, you're always paying, with that national insurance number, and you're always entitled to funds because it's removed from your wages. So I'll never say don't claim it, but it left me with a bitter taste, and I won't entertain that sort of stuff again. And I know they've got a job and they're just people doing their jobs, but it was
when we say, those that have served were probably the worst for it, of putting our hand up and saying, I need a bit of help. And then when you see examples like yourself, it just makes people think, why would I bother? We don't want special treatment. We don't want anything special. We don't want more than our civilian counterparts, do we? But we want what's fair. And, you've given so much in service of our country that you can see why you had a bittersweet, I want to call it resentment. I have resentment for you that Tony didn't stop there though, did he? You've gone in, you've then been successful at joining the prison service, and you carry those sea drills with you again. That integrity didn't serve you too well again, if you're happy to touch on that.
So the 2 years, I saw myself on the landings and a cat sea establishment in the northwest. Yeah. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. There's always going to be different types of leaders that you see good and bad examples of. And there was people that I came across in that prison service that just were not willing to understand what experiences other people have had. And I had a good time. Prisoners are in there for a reason. They know that. Again, depending on how you treat people is how you're received by the prisoners. And, there's a certain line, and a lot of them know straight away what line not to cross. Those that step across that line know that, that's going to only end one way, and the officers will always ultimately win. Doesn't matter whether they get the shots in or not. The officers will always have that individual behind the door where, ultimately they've placed themselves. So their actions, speak volumes. But it isn't always aided well by people in appointments, and it wasn't. And I came up a number of times at loggerheads with older members of the prison service that were in leadership appointments about general treatment and understanding of what's going on. And one of these happened to be a governor, just in regards to security of an establishment. I had this conversation about what was actually beneficial to the security of a site. And he took to asking me what I knew about security. And I just happened to mention that I knew a lot about security, being garrison sergeant major in Scotland, and having had ownership of the security policy for a Grade 2 listed castle and a number of barracks and security procedures at the front gate, and then how I could easily walk into a prison, show an ID card that wasn't actually checked, and then have access to hundreds of sets of suite keys, which gave me access to prison cells. And it didn't go down too well because he probably felt that I was embarrassing him in front of some of the other ears that were in the room. And, you know, he returned me to where I was working and then sort of tried to blacken my name, but I'd already established like a good working relationship with other officers, and I really did enjoy my time. I already knew that I was leaving. People already knew that I was going, so I wasn't afraid to call these people out. I didn't do it in front of, obviously, the prisoners because that would have been proper unprofessional, but I was not afraid at all of saying to somebody, you know, one-on-one or, you know, within the context of the prison officers, you know, you need to look at yourself because there's a reason it's going wrong and you're one of them.
And it was never unsolicited advice, was it? You know, this governor, you were asked for an opinion.
Yeah.
What do you know? And you delivered it. Yeah. I think that's...
But he did it in a condescending way, and that just shows that they don't have that interoperability and the skills to handle information or feedback.
Or the respect for others.
The respect for others, you know, it just showed a negative ability to take any sort of criticism. You know, he could have handled it much better, but he didn't. He took it as a personal attack and then, you know, tried to utilise his influence with other people. But ultimately, if we'd have come to get to know like what was happening on the wings and who was who and what the officers were all about, he probably would have got to know me a bit better. You know, other people took that time at the grass level, as I say, and I had a good working relationship with lots and lots of officers, but just came to loggerheads, I think, with the seniors.
That can take us back to the same in military context, isn't it? Our OCs and COs that take the time to talk to the troops and understand and have time on the ground and have time for others.
Yeah.
You know, it just shows that wherever we go in life, whatever we do, be it military, civilian, wherever we are, that, you know, we know what makes a good leader and what makes a boss. And there's a big distinction between a boss and a leader.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that you've had the bad end of some bosses. However, what may have dampened a lot of people, Tony still stayed true to himself, remained a resilient. I was going to say young man. I'm going to call you an old man now.
Oh, definitely old.
So again, you could have then post-prison service and you've injured your back, you could have turned around and that'll do. I'm going to retire. You know, which you may be able to with your pension. Have a nice quiet life and be done. You know, you've committed your entire adult life to service of the country through the military, prison service, and your younger years, commitment and service, we'll call it, towards your family, supporting your siblings and mum. Tony isn't done yet though, is he?
No.
What do we have next up in line?
So lined up now is Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service as a whole-time firefighter. I've been very fortunate to pass that very arduous of selection processes, which see so many, you know, potential candidates fall at different hurdles. And yeah, that's the next challenge. 18 weeks in 2026 of, you know, firefighter training, and then we'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to get through all the training, and then hopefully the old body, you know, sees me out into another form of skill. I'm just looking forward to being the new guy again, being the very, very newest of freshest faces, but learning all the skills. So heighten it back to being a trainee again, getting to sink my teeth into everything to do with firefighting, learning everything that there is, couplings, hoses, drills, engine, whatever context it is, breathing apparatus. I'm looking forward to that challenge, being able to be the older individual this time around, and my life skills maybe will be helpful to a youngster within that training context, and then seeing that different demographic. This time it will be roles reversed, where I'll be one of the oldest, and then I should see them come on leaps and bounds. I don't think I'll have any issues with ironing my firefighter's uniform or shining a set of boots, but I think everything else will come with regards to like the practical stuff. Hopefully I'll be able to keep up with the youngsters.
You seem pretty happy about being able to start. You've passed selection. It's for those that don't know, like the firefighting course, when we say arduous, and us in the military might laugh at it and be like, "Oh, arduous, come on!" But from what you've told us, it really is a hard selection process. The attrition rate or the success rate, we'll call it, it's so small, isn't it?
It is.
Out of how many people apply, actually get through to start training.
It's, again, a lot of work and effort as an older man went into the basics, so back to English and mathematics. So that's where the highest attrition rate is, obviously on that aptitude side of it, with the arithmetic and obviously just standard English. But then I think people pay a little bit of lip service, and that's where they go wrong in regards to, it's not as arduous as, well, it is, because you're being asked to do quite a lot, and there are certain specifications, and a lot of it is about listening to the instruction as well, not just going all guns in as we were. Because if you get the verbal instruction wrong on what you're being told to do, that has a detrimental effect to other members in the team that are on the ground as firefighters, and that's the basic that they want you to get right, being able to listen. And then you'll develop into those roles as your firefighter career goes on. But initially, it's about listening to the instruction, being fit to carry out the instruction, and then fall at those hurdles as well.
And are you excited for this next chapter?
Most definitely. Like you say, I'm doing a little bit of the whole retirement thing again now, and then keeping myself fit, and obviously just waiting on this.
You're a liar, Tony. No, you're not. He's not doing a retirement thing at all. You're working for a charity, or you're doing charity. You don't have the ability to sit still and do nothing, and it always fundamentally is in service of someone or something else. That be it in the military, in service of the country, the prison service, fire service. Keeping us safe. But out of charity work, and I think it touches on your CrossFit journey as well. Like, tell us a little bit more about that, because I think it's super cool what you're doing here.
So, in 2023, in the May, I was very gratefully received into CrossFit Leyland, my local gym, and that was just to sort of keep my head up and get me firing on all cylinders again, and give me a sense of worth, having taken that stumble, sort of mentally, and making those progressions that way. I got to get to know a charity called the 180 Project out of another CrossFit box, CrossFit Delta Fox in Darwin in Lancashire. And the 180 Project have 3 programs. They have the adult substance abusers program, they have the young youthful offenders program, and they have the adult prisoners program. And it will be the adult prisoners program that I work with predominantly out of Lancaster Farms Prison, and that experience as a prison officer is one of the things that I took into that interview, which I think will set me up greatly. But initially, when I start in January, it will be working with all 3 programs at CrossFit Delta Fox, and just that ability to convey sort of the benefits of fitness to mental health, and knowing sort of what they have to do from their registered houses. So the prison probation program look after the registered house for those that are released from prison, and then they come and do CrossFit as part of their mental health physical training program, as well as everything else that they have to do. So whether that be care in the community or time in the community or whatever else their program states, then they do that alongside doing the fitness and nutrition. So really looking forward to meeting all 3 groups in the new year, getting into Lancaster Farms and doing that. But I just think, as you've said and you touched on, like, I don't think I'm cut out for anything else. Like, ultimately, my life is about service. I'm not going to do anything else. I was never made for a desk. I was never, going to be, that mental aptitude to, be running companies and all that sort of stuff. It's just, here's a set of skills. How can I best apply them? And a continued life of service for me, whatever that looks like. Maybe a tracksuit for the 180 project, a firefighter's outfit, hopefully. But ultimately, as I said, 26 years as service to Queen and then King. That's ultimately where I see myself. So
it's inspiring, Tony. Let's chat a little bit about combat fuel as well. This is our podcast, you have to. And hopefully we finish off on some nice happy notes. Why combat fuel? Very, very selfish of me to ask, but why us? And there's other military supplement brands out there. There's other guys that do stuff. But why us? What resonates with you to want to be a part of our family, of which you have for 8 years now?
I think it's from that first time that I reached out, and that, there are certain people that you work with over the years that, you can call friends, and, that's what it feels like. That friendship, that element of loneliness, you reach into different things and you sort of get those like warm feelings, you get a bit of reciprocation, and then that support comes to whether, you're supporting a company, hopefully being able to spread the message, and then, you come and support one of the events that I did, and then ultimately other events. And it's just, as you said, people use my discount code, and as I've said to you, as the brand grows and it continues to grow and all the big companies are watching on, like, what would I be able to offer? I can't offer like the likes of, the biggest names within the family of Team Combat Fuel, and their pull and their reach and all that sort of stuff is something that I will never have the numbers on. But to still be part of it, and what could I bring, but to be included, it's, like I say, I will always be very grateful. All I do is create posts, take silly photos, little bits of video, try and spread the word, but remain loyal without, loyalty. It's one of those things it's what you have to have ingrained in you. That comes with any form of progression, so consistency. It's how people need to operate without that loyalty. And it's reciprocation. You just establish friendship from it. That's what I believe it is. Like friends, I could probably count, especially when I left the army, just how many immediate friends I had, how many people sort of talked to me from those days, send messages, actually, care what's going on, just send proper heartfelt, inquiries as to what's going on. And, I won't entertain any of these others. It's just, I watch the creation. I know who was first into markets in regards to, social media. I know what is a good product. I know what's working. I know what the underlying statements are. And I see so many people now trying to jump in and cut corners and blacken the name. It's just, it's infuriating, frustrating, but they'll never match this. This has been born out of true love, out of something that, happened that allowed you to then think, right, I'm going to do this. And then you've planned it and executed it, and it just resonates with all the key things that fit into my understanding of, my main drives were, reliability, durability, sustainability, where you've been able to sustain the building. You've endured, obviously, the time, and folk are relying on you to produce those next steps, and you've done it. You've delivered. You're at the forefront, and haters are always going to hate, as the youngsters say. But the big wigs are watching. I've said it for months, for years. They're watching, and I've seen the products come to market, and then these big ones have seen it, and they've stolen your idea because they can pay for people to sit on top of it. Prime example is the Iron Brew flavour with the Stoltman brothers and that My Protein rubbish.
Yeah.
So it's like tap water. But because they've got vast amounts of money behind it, if folk just did the product comparison, it's formulated and it doesn't compare, and it's safe. I don't get the stamps anymore. I don't get the compulsory drugs test, and bring on the firefighters compulsory drug testing. I don't know how it works, but I live on this stuff. My cupboards are full of this stuff. I will champion this stuff until I'm dust, and then someone can take it out my cupboards and I'll donate it to someone in the gym. But it will be like that until I go, or until you sell, And I hope it does come that way. I hope somebody like Gymshark buy you, or something big will happen for you, and I'll be on to watch it.
Awesome, thank you, Tony. And I mean, just to say, Combat Fuel isn't for sale either. I love what I do.
Definitely not for sale.
I love what I do. I remember chatting to you like a couple of years back when you'd been a bit quiet, and it was picked up the phone to you and I was like, Tony, what's going on? It's sent you a little gift package for nothing other than just know that other people out there care about you and crack on. I think you'd come back off a night shift in the prison service. You hadn't got it for a couple of days because you were working, and you came back and you were just like, why? What do I have to offer you? But loyalty's, it's a rare thing these days. Other bigger brands can offer a lot more than what we can. And for all of yourself and the other athletes that stick about, that could perhaps sell their souls to some of the big companies to have worse products but line their pockets. You choose to stand by me and the branding, from its inception of where we were working out of, piling it up in spare rooms in my house and throughout my kitchen, to then having a gym that you visited many a times, to then this is the 5th iteration now of where we've been, and you were I think you were the second person we took on after Big Reggie. Well, can't call him Big Reg, can we? Short Reggie.
Short Reg.
Thank you for your loyalty. I think it should absolutely be. You don't just throw it away because someone might not be able to offer you something as much. It swings and roundabouts. It's a relationship as much as it is a friendship. Sometimes I might want to lean on you and the other athletes, and I hope that you feel like that sometimes you can lean on me, and if it's just picking up the phone to, I've got, my house is always open. You're always welcome to come around there, come and spin shit ones and terrorise partners while they cook for us. I don't cook. But fire services next to Tony. Is there anything else left for you to achieve? I'm gonna get this nailed.
Once I've got myself sorted and established in the fire service, I will continue what I started in sort of 2020 with regards to the charity things. Like, this back injury has robbed me of sort of this year's main charity event, and that's what's missing now, just that side of it. I started in the military, I waited, and then continued outside of that. obviously when I did the CrossFit's longest row, you know, for the defibrillators and all that sort of stuff, and just being robbed with this back injury nearly a year, you know, and being made worse by the prison service. It's just something that is still itching away. You know, it started with little numbers, it got into some bigger numbers, and yeah, I'll get my teeth back into that side of it, and then I think that will be the full circle of everything coming good, and then take on any other hurdles that get in the way with the same sort of attitude. Just smash through them instead of trying to get over them, and then I'll have everything in, as I say, full circle.
Awesome. If you were to go back to young Tony, what's the piece of advice you'd give your younger self, knowing what you know now and what you've endured?
Yeah. I don't think I would tell him to do much else. I really did enjoy, you know, that whole experience, as I will always pass that on to, you know, the younger individuals that still entertain me, spinning bits about the military and, you know, whether they should join or whether they shouldn't. And yeah, I enjoyed absolutely everything that I was doing because I took all those opportunities when they presented themselves. And that's just the message. Take them, because if you don't take the opportunities, you'll never know. I surrendered enough time as a young dad for that progression of my career. That hindsight's a wonderful tool, but I wouldn't have the things I have now if I didn't do that. It's just you get to achieve them in another way now that I've got Adeline present with my current partner Lara, so I can find those different balances in this future work that I'm hoping to achieve, you know, in that different work-life balance, and we'll see how that one plays out. But I wouldn't tell him to change. It just, you crack on, keep smiling with your big goofy teeth, and yeah, you're in for some surprises along the way. Yeah. So keep doing what you're doing.
That's brilliant. Tony, thank you so much for coming on.
No worries.
Thank you for your service to country, to King and Queen, and nothing left in the shake.
Oh, thanks for having me.